All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the podcast. Today we have Lara Heimann from LYT Yoga. If you guys just Google her, you're going to see that she is super famous for her yoga method. I'm super excited to have her on here just because I'm a big fan of yoga, but the way her method, her approach really integrated the mechanics into the basic principle of yoga. And I just love when you have this intertwine of like Western and Eastern. And I just think like, why limit ourselves to just one approach? Why don't we just get a big melting pot of everything, right? It's like going to New York City, you get the best food. So Laura, thank you so much for being on the show.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Nadia. I'm really excited. I always love talking shop with other physical therapists and movement lovers. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so before we get started, can we just have a little bit of background, where you come from and how you end up where you are right now?
Yes, well, I'm literally from North Carolina. That's where I grew up. I was raised there, and I'm one of four. I have three brothers. I'm a triplet. So one of my two of my brothers are, born with me. And I think that's relevant because I think it just, from the very beginning, I grew up with this real balance of energy and acceptance and empowerment. And I did a lot of things with my brothers. We were all really into athletics and sports. We were also really academic and curious. So it was just a really nice environment to grow up in. And we all three of us ended up going into the medical field. My triplet brothers and I all did. One of my brothers is also a PT, and then the other one is a doctor. And then my older brother did something different. But that just shows that we just had that kind of inquiry early on. So I went to undergrad, and my undergrad major was biological anthropology and anatomy, which was really fascinating. That's not where I'd gone in thinking I would be pre-med, and then just decided to go the other track, and finally kind of came back and found this wonderful, wonderful major that's at Duke University. It's one of the few schools that offers this biological anthropology and anatomy. So it was really right in line with what I was already interested in, which was understanding anatomy, but also understanding, we did comparative anatomy between ourselves and other primates, understanding why we have adapted or evolved the way we have based on different time periods and evolution. So it was that all of that was interesting, and that just led me into going into PT school. So I went to PT school, and all of that was still that was at Duke as well. And so I was ready to leave North Carolina, and I was dating someone at the time who brought me up to New Jersey.
Oh, there you go.
Yes, which I never would have chosen, but I've loved it. I've been here 27 years. And so I found an amazing place to work here. I was working in a rehab center, which was also, I think, one thing I was actually saying this to my husband the other day. I don't think I've ever had a vision of what I wanted to do. And some people really have that, like, oh, I want to get married and have a picket fence. And all. I just never had that. And I think it's actually helped me because I've been kind of present in my journey and really felt what was. So I, for instance, thought briefly that I would want to go into orthopedics. My dad was an orthopedic surgeon, want to go into sports medicine. And then I went into my first job was at a rehab clinic. I was working with older clients. I was working with post-surgical clients, and then I really got into neurology. And so I went back and got my postgraduate specialization in the neurological rehab. And that really has been the foundation for where I am now. Simultaneous to that, I was also started teaching yoga. I loved it. I fell in love with it. I'd always been interested in movement. I had been teaching fitness. So teaching yoga was just like, again, sharing something that I was passionate about. But after a few years of teaching, kind of following the traditional, more by the book, by the way it was being taught lineages and stuff, I was recognizing that there was some major gaps between how people were practicing and learning yoga and how it was being taught. And the main thing there was teachers were not very knowledgeable about the body. And I feel like if you're teaching something that's primarily movement based, you should have some knowledge about that. And that isn't a judgment of them. That just wasn't emphasized. It was kind of like, here are poses, here's the spiritual practice and traditions, and then, weld them together in whatever way. But if you're teaching somebody how to move, that isn't enough because, and then a lot of these practices were overemphasizing in range of motion, and just the sequencing wasn't as, I thought, intelligent as it could be for long-term sustainability.
Mhm.
And so I started incorporating some of the practices I was doing with my very involved neurological impaired patients. A lot of the stuff on the ground, this developmental work that we do from, that we all came into the world with, and that we can really go back to and revisit and reclaim it and get stronger by emphasizing our proximal stability, our postural muscles. And I started weaving that into more of the practice, and it seemed to really resonate with people.
Mhm.
So again, it just evolved into something I thought I needed to teach more people how to do this. So I developed a teacher training. And then if I had a teacher training, I needed to open up a studio. So it was just like one business option led to another.
Mhm.
And so I had a studio for 9 years. I started doing online training 3 years ago. I have an online platform that I started 4 years ago. And then I have a podcast that I started 4 years ago. I travel internationally for workshops and trainings, and then we have a lot of initiatives right now to get into the spaces that really need this mindful practice of movement to improve lifestyle, which is corporate and hotels and things like that. So we have a lot of really cool stuff happening, and
Mhm.
it's just continuing to grow, and I'm really grateful for that. But that's like the short, long answer of how it all started.
No, I think it's great. What I love, I think you're seem like you're a rebel at heart in some way, where you
Yes.
just, yeah. I mean, I can already picked it up by just
Yeah.
talking to you,
Yeah.
and I think you just kind of go in with, and I love this too because I can relate to that. You go into something with a really good intention of helping people, fixing it, and you realize the vehicle you're in it, the vehicle you're driving, it's not a good enough vehicle where you is something's missing, and you just kind of like, wait, what is, and you just kind of do a little detective work, like what is missing, right? So if you go based on a medical model where everything is all structural, all medical based, research based, great, but what it doesn't talk about is the spiritual side, the emotional side, where if you go in yoga, it's more of the spiritual space and all of that stuff, but ignore the medical side. So I think in a way it was like a yin and yang symbol for you, where by like almost like, you're Lara one day, and then at night you become like almost like Lara the yoga instructor, where now you have to wear like, all right, science hat off, spiritual hat on, and you're probably like, why am I switching all these hats? Why don't I just combine the two hats and make it into something new? I mean, am I correct to say that that's how?
Maddie, that's exactly it. I said, for a while I felt like I was wearing two hats because I was, I feel like there's yoga is one example. I'm sure there are many others where people feel like they can't be a rebel. Like if somehow it's disrespecting this tradition, this lineage. So I was feeling that. I felt like,
Mhm.
okay, I'm just following what, I have seen and practiced and read in the books and seen in trainings and whatnot. But it was not in alignment with that, physical therapist, which is, I want to help people, I want to educate people, and that isn't happening on the mat. And the way I often say when people ask, like, how is it different, I said, than other yoga, I said the biggest way I feel like we're different and we've been successful with this is that many other practices, you just come into it and you start where you are and you go.
Mhm.
And what we do is we say, you're coming in already with some existing habitual compensations or imbalances. That's just being a human.
Mhm.
And I want to use this time on the mat to truly tune you into that. That's the spiritual mindful part, is like actually paying attention. This isn't a judgment. This is not a aspiration to, look like this in a pose. It's really to feel embodied and to notice where you are compensating, where you could, hold yourself together a little bit more in terms, instead of just like hanging out on joints. So we really are looking at the mat as an opportunity to change the way you move and feel and breathe in life versus just coming to the mat with all the ways you already are doing it and perhaps exacerbating those imbalances. And if we really want that balance, we have to pay attention to what our habits have been doing for us.
Mm-hmm. So, just a couple points I want to go back into is the fact that we're going back to principle fundamentals, especially when it comes to yoga. There's a core, almost like a core tenet in anything that's like older, has traditional behind it, and even like the way I look at how I train, strength training and all that stuff. There's also basic principle, but there's nothing wrong. You're not going against principle. I think you're just expanding on it, right? I think that's the difference.
Totally. Yeah. I love that you said that. That's what I came to embrace. And I knew it in my heart that when people were like, ooh, this isn't, when I was started doing this,
I'm sure you get a lot of hate.
It's very common now to have more functional stuff, but it was very not common. Mm-hmm. And it was, some people immediately loved it. And some people who were very attached to this idea of tradition really were like, this is not yoga. Why don't you call it fitness? And I was like, what's wrong with fitness? And yoga is, yoga is, there is so many things about yoga. It is a concept, it is a construct, it is a philosophy, and it is evolved and expanded, just like everything else that should, right? We don't even look back and think like, well, this was practiced 200 years, the way we grew this or the way we did something. We are in a different lifestyle and we want to expand it. And all traditions the ones that are practicing with that kind of open-heartedness, they're doing that. They're expanding based on the needs of the people and realizing like change is a good thing. It's good. Like if we're not changing, we're not growing. So I think more and more people have recognized that, and it's just expanding it. That's all.
Yeah. And I'm sure in the beginning were disrupting the norm on both ends, right? You were disrupting the norm of physical therapists of, oh, hey, now you're not doing PT, you're doing yoga. Well, this is not a yoga place. Why are you doing that? Or if you go into a yoga setting, you start teaching the anatomy. It's like, whoa, that's not yoga. We're not talking about that. So, you were stuck in the middle for a little bit. And I can relate to that because the practice that I have now, it was the same way because the traditional medical model does not influence enough movement. And to go in, my background's in strength conditioning and personal training. And because I know how to get people strong, I was like, well, if I can get them out of pain, I can get them to be stronger. I remember the first time I had one of my ACL patient, who's a female, by the way, back squatting like eight rep max. And that clinic director pulled me aside, like, this girl's going to get hurt. I was like, how? She's not going to get hurt. She's going to get hurt because she's not strong enough. I was like, but we're getting her stronger. So like we obviously ruffle some feathers on both ends there. So let's talk about that whole journey, because at some point you probably feel a little bit alone, isolated. How do you overcome that? Because, and I like this as a teaching point, because when you get injured as an athlete, you feel isolated by default because you're not with your team anymore. So as a profession, how do you deal with that? Especially showing up to work as a PT and then showing up to work as a yoga instructor?
That's a great question. And for one thing, I left the clinical setting pretty early. And so, and I would go back and visit my friends there. And across the board, they were all envious of what I was doing. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, just the freedom, that I could, craft my own day, that financially I was as successful, if not more, than I was when I was working 40 hours a week in a clinic. But they didn't have the, I don't want to say the courage, but there was, there is a bit of courage to take
the risk,
the path it's not taken. And so for various reasons, they didn't have the means, the courage, whatever. It didn't feel like it was something they could risk. So for me, I never doubted it. It immediately felt really great. What was always interesting is when people would say, oh, I want to book a private with you. Do you do PT or you do yoga? And I was like, it doesn't have to be either lane. Like, I'm just looking at you and helping you move better. And so what I'm doing is I'm bringing in all my knowledge, all my experience into each session. And so we don't have to label it anything, right? So if you for instance, for people who have been a little bit, I guess, scared about trying yoga, or thinking that it was either this or that, or some box, like, oh, they're going to sit around and or, oh, we're going to go into deep stretches. This has been a real relief for those people. It's a very welcoming, because it's, again, like, make this what you want. I just want to educate you, introduce some concepts, and really help you be at home in your body, which is, I think, if you're at home in your body, you're going to be at home in your spirit, because your body is containing your spirit, it's containing your life and your energy. And so that was more what I felt like sometimes I would come up against, is there is like, well, you're either sitting and that's spiritual, or you're moving and that's physical. And to me, I was like, no, I know I feel spiritual when I'm walking in the woods. I'm moving my body. I'm in contact with the earth around me and the magic there. I don't have to be still and close my eyes to do that. And there's many ways that we can feel what spirituality is, which is a sense of strong connection to self and the values that we hold. So when I talk about the core, I talk about we want to be strong in our core. We can be stable there, but it's also representing we can be clearer in our values. And so wrapping back into what you said, I've always been clear on my values. So it didn't matter to me if I was alone in it, as long as I was not betraying myself. I've always felt good about it. I haven't minded being the Lone Ranger. I love that I have an amazing community now, but I was okay with doing something different, because that was satisfying. I was always in touch with what I believed worked for me, and I just wanted to share it.
Yeah, and it's make everything worth it, right? Because if you're doing something new, as long as it's aligned with your value, it's meaningful. And that's what I love, is that it's going back to your whole concept of holding your core, because your core could be your physical core, which is literally your core, or your value, or how you perceive yourself. And it's going back to like Maslow hierarchy of needs. It's going like a step below self-actualization, which is, like self-importance, how you view yourself, self-esteem. And I think as long as you take care of that, and that you're moving in the right direction, that align with your North Star, at the end of the day, you don't need the accolades as much. You need some as a human being. We're a social creature, but that one accolades will outweigh the 100 doubts that you would have, right? And I think, well, probably the biggest doubt would be the one between your ears. So how did you deal with that?
I think that I've just, again, stayed very true to what I believed was needed in the world, in this area, which was using my knowledge and experience and passion to help others, because we're not taught about our bodies. We're not taught about, we aren't getting any kind of guidance. And it's the one, I always say, this is our home that's with us forever. We do not vacate it. We do not change and move to a death. This is with us. And so it's fascinating, horrifying to me that we grow up, so many of us, who don't choose the path we did and know nothing about their body, really know very little known. And it doesn't have, even though it's very like a complex and engineered, like just miracle. It doesn't have to be complicated. Like, we can teach people about that. So I think for me, I've never been one that had a lot of doubt. I'm always interested in what other people have to say. So I'm not somebody that's closed-minded. I'm really interested in feedback. Like, I want to know, even on my team, like, I get everybody's opinion, and my husband will sometimes say, you're really pulling people a lot. And I'm like, that's my nature. I love to hear, because what I want to do is serve, and to serve well, you have to know, like, what are the needs? And at a certain point, if I'm speaking a certain way, or I'm thinking like I have an idea this way, I don't know if it resonates for other people. So I think for me, I've always been able to take people's feedback and like let it, fall aside if it really didn't resonate with me and it didn't bother me and I didn't over perseverate about it. So I haven't had self-doubt. I really have had, I've been lucky in that regard. And I think it's just kind of who I am. I was raised by two amazing individuals who just literally told me I could be whatever I wanted to be, but also gave me the skills to do that. Like, and just humility. I think it's important to stay, like at the end of the day, we're really specks in the universe. So it's like this combination. My dad was a quantum physicist lover, and it's like we are so small. And yes, we're small, and so it's like a combination of like recognizing we can really do our part and play a role, but at the same time, like we're not that big of a deal.
No, I love that. I say to myself all the time, I'm like a speck of sand in a giant beach.
Yeah.
Like sometime when I make things a big deal, like it doesn't need to be a big deal. And there's so many principles that I want to go back and touch on. The one part is creating that awareness that you mentioned. Because most of the time when people are in pain and they're going through something, the normal instinct for us, survival instincts, to run away from the pain. Where I love your approach, and this similar approach that we do here is we kind of take them towards the abyss so they can realize they're in an abyss, and then they just feel the pain. And really, I grew up Buddhist, so accepting is huge. Accept that life is suffering. I don't think I shared this with anyone, but I was actually a monk for a week, and all we did was meditate all day. And that's when I learned to accept of like, I'm sure you've done this before, where you meditate to the point where both your legs are numb and you're just like, well, this is part of it now. Let me just keep going. And to touch on another point is that you can be mindful while you're sitting, but you can be really mindful while you're moving. And I think moving does it more for me as a mover. Like all my stress goes away. I'm in tune with my body. I understand what doesn't feel well, what feels great. And, just applying that concept with rehab, which is totally missing in some sense of taking people through the discomfort, not the pain, but discomfort, and then just make them realize that like the discomfort's there as a feedback, as a guide, but not as something to do harm. And I think by you applying to your yoga method, I think it's huge. And that's why it's both therapeutic and spiritual, right? Was that, what was the core principle behind the, LYT yoga? Like when you whiteboarded the first time, did you say, like, hey, if they can walk away with these two things, I think that's what I want?
Well, I think, so the acronym, because we love acronyms, it's, my marketing people were like, we want your name in it. And I was like, I really don't want my name in it. I want it to be something that is its own entity. So we kind of compromised in this wonderful way. I said, well, why don't we call it LYT Yoga? It's Lara's yoga technique. So my name's in it, but most people have no idea that it's an acronym. But I talk about feeling lit up, which is this idea that, again, we're so in alignment. And like you said, when you're moving, I call it like the snow globe effect, where you could sit and you have all the particles and they're still, but sometimes a lot of the times you need to rearrange them. You need to clear them. And so you shake them, you move them around, and then they resettle. And in that, we know when we move, it affects every system in our body. And most importantly, it affects our nervous system so directly that we are making it more intelligent. So it knows, like, kind of like, my dog, my dog is at rest, he's at rest. He's not thinking about like, oh my God, he's not like halfway, totally at rest. And then when he's ready to go, he's like jumps right up, right? So that's a great adaptable nervous system. It's like, I know when I need to relax and I know when I need to really engage. And so I think for me, being lit up means you're maximizing your potential in your nervous system. So you can handle challenge, you can handle discomfort, physical, emotional discomfort. We are, like you said in Buddhism, we are going to suffer. And, that's probably another thing. It's like, we don't want to come right out to second graders and say, hey, life is going to be hard. It's better to say, like, let's build resilience because there are going to be challenges. And we're going to be able to celebrate the challenges as well as the triumphs in equal way because we are clearer. And I think that for me, those I always spoke from my own kind of background. And like I grew up Christian, I married a Jew, but I had this amazing preacher, and he never was preaching like the word. He was preaching about how to be a better human.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all of that with my own experience, and I'm not I'm not taking words from some scriptures of any kind. I'm just trying to apply what all of us, I think, universally feel, which is we want to be kind. It's not easy to be kind. It's actually a lot easier to not be kind.
Mm-hmm.
To be kind takes strength, it takes inner strength, it takes a real firm foundation to be able to pause and not say something that's rude, to be able to look outside your own perspective and feel like this person is hurting, or this person grew up differently and they think differently than I do, but that doesn't mean they're wrong or they're awful. It's just, it gives you a lot more grace, I think. And so, but that all of it comes from strength. I really
Mm-hmm.
believe that kindness comes from strength. Empowerment comes from strength, both physical, mental, and emotional. And so I feel like lit is really, when you're lit up, you are taking good care of yourself so that you can be a better human in the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're just on it, right? I think this day where, to me, some of the most meaningful days that I've had in the past was those days where I choose constraint and kindness because it was hard. And then
Mhm.
the worst part is like after those days, you go home, you just want to eat bags of chips because your willpower is super low.
Yes, yes. You're like reining it in. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I get challenged. Like the only time I'm challenged the most with that is when it comes to my kids,
Mm-hmm.
because my instinct is something like, something happens and I just want to like go and just throttle someone,
Mm-hmm.
and it's more protective. For me, I don't have that. Like I'm kind of, I'm aware that there's a lot of hurt people that walk around and are not, that are just projecting that.
Mm-hmm.
And so that has helped me for sure. Fortunately, I've been mostly exposed to just the most amazing people who are so appreciative and grateful and joy filled. And it's really, it, it keeps the flame going strong for sure.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. I think the fact you just say protective, because like pain is a protective response of what we're doing, right? And
Yeah.
just like, you have certain things, someone does something to your son, you want to be protective. And the first instinct is to go address that immediately. Just like when you first have pain, the first instinct is like, how do I get rid of it? Do I need to cut this limbs off and all of that? But really the right thing to do is like, you have to sit with it for a little bit. So that way you can kind of solve what's going on when it comes to that pain. Where's that coming from? So how do you, when you first start, lit yoga, and as applying all these concepts or these new principles from both the medical world and also the yoga world, did you also think about like, okay, here's how we can solve, like what was the bigger picture? Was the bigger picture to solve like chronic pain? Was it a bigger picture to just like, hey, let's get people to move well, understanding their basic principle of how their body feel, and then really recreate a relationship with pain?
I think all of those things, I don't think any of them were in my conscious mind.
Mm-hmm.
But what I was, a lot of times it's what we see in the world, whether it's the world like global world or the world of PT or the world of movement. And what I saw is, one, there's a lot of ageism and a lot of like ideas of after a certain age, I'm going to decline and this is
Mm-hmm.
normal and all this stuff. I saw a lot of that in the early, like I would have, I'd work with somebody in their 40s
Mm-hmm.
and they were like, well, ever since I turned 40, my knee hurts all the time and it's just getting older. And I'm just like, you're 40. You're like, you
Mm-hmm.
could live another 50, 60 years. What are you talking about? And then I would see people like limit their movement experience because they were in fear of what might happen, in their 60s, like not getting on the ground. And I was like, you need to get on the ground. Like this
Mm-hmm.
is like a functional thing and it's a safety thing. So that was one thing that was like very much came to the forefront, is people's idea of aging and ability and movement and disability, and
Mm-hmm.
we see in our culture, you go and you move into a one floor house, you get Velcro in your sneakers, all of these things that you're becoming like,
The
like
stair lift.
disabled, right? Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, And then the other thing is, yes, pain as this concept that is like, there's an injury and therefore, like you said, I need to withdraw from it. And starting to really approach it more like, well, there's a reason this pain is there.
Mm-hmm.
Let's look at why that is there and how your body is protecting you. It's in the only way it knows how to. But if maybe you take away the reason, the body will learn that it's actually fine. It's not going to
Mm-hmm.
send out those signals. So it's really taking pain as like, this is a person in the room who is confused about what's happening. And
Mm-hmm.
but has been there for a reason, you know, and it might've been the way you were sitting at your desk for 20 years. You know, it's like, I have had so many chronic pain clients this last year alone, I think more than I've ever had. And I'm, you know, stress, like
Mm-hmm.
talking to them, like pain is related to stress.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're going and you're seeing all these doctors who are doing all this imaging and wanting to give you an injection here, an injection here, but nobody's asking you like, how are you feeling? How are you
Mm-hmm.
sleeping?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have unresolved stuff? I had 3 clients this year who had major unresolved familial stuff from 20, 30 years ago. And they're high operating executives. And what I said is, you have been running from it and, you know, going and pushing, but your body doesn't forget, your brain doesn't forget. And so why don't we like address that and see what happens with this pain, you know? And I think when people understand that pain is just, again, it's an opinion that your brain
Mm-hmm.
is giving you, and it's much better to understand the why than to decide not to move or to get a shot or what. Again, not to like, you know, there's room for it all, but there's a lot. You have to unpack the why before you just go to doing something about it, which is either not moving or getting surgery or doing whatever. So I remember my dad as an orthopedic surgeon saying, you know, he would talk on the phone for hours with clients. I can't even
Mm-hmm.
imagine a doctor nowadays doing this.
Yeah.
When I say talk, I mean listen. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, he'd get off the phone, and I remember he said to me, people just need to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, oh, how powerful, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I witnessed that a lot growing up. This is not somebody who's like, I'm going to write you a script. You need to do this. Many of these low back people that were having low back pain were sad, were stressed. Yes, their back was having maybe potentially some kind of tissue issue, but they were having other issues too. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just, it's actually very affirming to people. Yes, what you're feeling is real, and let's find out the reason for it. So at the, you know, at the highest level, we're going to hope it goes away and it won't come back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's, you know, and I think it's, I think I rambled with that, but that's kind of, yeah. So I don't think I had this idea that I was going to necessarily be addressing all those, but I am always attentive to what's in front of me. And that's what I saw. I
Mm-hmm.
saw women who didn't give themselves enough time for self-care. They would feel guilty for taking an hour yoga practice. I was like,
Yep.
what? I mean, a majority. I was like, why don't I ever feel guilty? Well, I grew up in a very male oriented, I was treated in the same way. It wasn't like, you're going to stay at home.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take time for yourself, that's really indulgent. It's like, no, of course you take time. If you don't take time for yourself, you're not going to be your best self. So I've
Mm-hmm.
really practiced. That was like probably my first group of people were moms at home and a lot of them had guilt over, and I just were like, relieve yourself. You're going to be nicer. You're going to be better for your children. You're going to be a better partner. You're going to be clearer. You're going to be more capable. You're going to feel better. You're going to have more energy.
Mm-hmm.
So do this. This is necessary. And then it expanded to seeing like, oh, people are walking around with, different aches and pains and thinking it's just kind of normal. Or then they can't do something anymore because of that. It's the body is resilient, and it's really yes, we have changes, you know, yes, we have things. Are things a little bit more challenging? Like somebody on my teacher training call asked me last night, they're like, is there any time, like when you reach a certain point, like 70, for instance, it's just like no hope on changing like the way you move or the posture? And I was like, no, not until you're dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. There are things that are going to be harder as you get older because you've had many more years of living with these perhaps movement imbalances and dysfunctions in place, but it's never too late to improve.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I think the hardest thing to change when you're older is your habits because you're so set in your ways,
Yes.
and we're such a dynamic and fluid being, and I think we're very adaptable. That's why we live this far, this long as a human race. But we are, you know that meme of someone riding a bicycle, they stick the stick in front of the front wheel, they fell down, and they're like, "Oh, it's someone else's fault." Like that's us, but except it's our habit. Like I can literally point out times where I feel really crappy, and it's based on my poor decision making process of why did I make that bad decision. Rarely is there ever a time that it was someone else's fault. Like if I go out, I had a few drinks, I come home, the next day I'm dehydrated and all of like that's all my fault. But I totally believe that people can be changed when it comes to behavioral and like spiritual and mental. Like some of the books I've read is people who have went through near death experience, overcome it, and all of that stuff. And my favorite quote is like, everyone has two lives, and the second lives begin when they realize they only have one. And that's when people realize, like, that's why when people have like near death experience, they realize like, oh my God, I guilt is holding me back from doing what I want to do. All this societal pressure, all the things I don't have time for are holding me back now because I'm so close. If you have, a year left to live, things are totally different. You're going to start living your life. You're going to start prioritizing things more. And if someone come in and like the way I approach is like, I lost my dad 3 years ago now, and he passed away when he was 58. So super young. And I'm 34. I always looked at it as like, okay, what if that was my card? That I don't have till 58. How would I live my life? And each day I just go it and I make it as more meaningful. When I get to 58, what if I get to 80, right? That's another bonus round. So like that's always been my approach when it comes to that. And I love the conversation that we have because most people are listening to this. They have all this preconceived notion of why they can't do things because 99% of the people in the world are telling them they can't do it. And what I like to do is like to talk to someone like you who has literally, what I love is you say like, you know what? I had no clue what I was building, and I just keep building it and I keep refining it as I'm doing it. Because most people would like, they could lie to you, be like, oh, I had this whole grand plan. I knew I was going to record 3 podcasts. I'm going to be teaching this. You're like, no, I'm just literally building as I go. And that's how I've been approached my whole life. I'm just feeling like I'm just digging a tunnel. And I was like, I don't know where I'm going to go, but it's going somewhere. And when it comes to your yoga, just to kind of go back to this, what I love, I saw one post that you did 2-3 weeks ago, and I love this, is someone's doing a warrior one pose, has knee pain, you went, fix certain position, next thing you know, no knee pain. And I'm just like, that's it. If I take a still picture of what you taught that girl and what she was doing before, you and I can't tell that she has that pain or not. But it was the soft, it was a soft feedback that dictated there was a pain. So I love the fact that you went and you like, hey, I'm just going to fix this position. And next thing you know, the knee pain goes away. So that's something I really appreciate because we need more of that in the world PT, where we want to drive movement, but we also need to have that soft feedback. So did you always approach things that way? Or how do you slowly, like, do you have a big aha moment where like, wait, there's another component that like we're not looking at?
I mean, I don't know if I had any one moment, but I would say that, first of all, I always credit my kinesiology teacher in PT school, who was absolutely brilliant. And she was, and this was, I don't know, almost 30 years ago, she was saying, don't look at the pain like that. And I've talked to so many people since then, and they didn't learn that until many years later in their PT. But right out of the gates in school, she's like, do not look at the pain. That's not where the problem is. Now that you've been in PT, a lot of we know that, but there's still PTs who are like, oh, you have knee pain, let's treat your knee. Mm-hmm. So from the beginning, I had really, really intelligent, very just inquiring mind type people who were looking globally, looking at understanding fascial connections, understanding nervous system, understanding that pain again is telling you something, but it's not telling you to stop doing it. So for instance, the woman you're talking about, she was young. She's like in her early 30s. And she's like, I really don't like to, be on my knee because because it bothers my knee. And I said, well, that's when I said, well, let's see it. So I just like pulled her right up because she was tilting and, compressing right into that. That's not going to be a quick fix for her because that's so, she's got a few decades of, habitually tilting her pelvis, locking her knees back. So she's shortened, all the front tissue is really shortened. So when she puts weight down in the knee, pelvis is going and it jams. People don't understand. It's either like if you aren't able to pull the femur up into the bowl of the pelvis, it's going to go down into the knee joint, and then that doesn't feel good. But I'm 53. I can get on my knees no problem, and I'm hoping that'll be the case for many years because when I'm on my knees, I'm not jamming my knee joint. I'm not sinking into the joints. So I just think that it's paying attention, listening, reading. My brother is a PT and he is absolutely brilliant. And when we talk, we just chat about stuff. And he's like someone he's a genius. He's a movement genius. So if I have any questions, I'll be like, so I understand this, but how would you better explain something about like why the glutes, when I was explaining, because in yoga, there'd be so many dumb cues, like relax your glutes when you're back bending. And that was just passed on and on and on. As a PT, you're like, why would you relax your glutes when your hips are
you're standing?
Right?
Yeah.
Like that was, people. So I always said those cues came about because somebody didn't understand the body, but they understood that some people who did it might be compressing their SI joint if they're like working their glutes. So the answer was, well, if you relax your glutes, it's not going to do that. Well, you could also go deeper because you're going into, compression of the joints, which appears deeper. So I was talking to my brother about this a few years back, and I'm like, I've got to start. I'm posting about this, and people will come back. Well, isn't it true that could compress your SI joint? And I was like, no. And then he's like, well, no, because when you use your glutes, it's also the way the glutes are attaching to the sacrum is where the dorsal SI ligament attaches. And when you're activating your glutes, it helps to hold the kind of tone in the SI ligament, which is going into the thoracodorsal fascia, and then that whole line. And he was going like into it in a different level. And I'm like, so I have this genius in my back pocket. And I learn a lot from him. And I think the thing is I've always been curious, like if there's is there a better way to explain it? Is there another way to explain it? And so I stay engaged in the conversation too. And that's why, again, when people are like, well, research has shown that posture doesn't correlate to pain, I want to be like, dude, have you seen the 2,000 plus people that I've seen whose suboptimal posture definitely contribute to the pain they're feeling now, in addition to the joint compression, the injury, the lack of good, like diaphragmatic breathing. I mean, on and on and on. So that's where I get a little ruffled when it's just, when it's like, it's got to be research based or we're not going to practice it. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's a very, it's not a critical thinking approach. Obviously research, we need it. And but research is keeping up with what things we've known for years.
Yes. Research is just affirming what we've been doing for the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh yeah, that's why it works. I was like, oh, okay, thank you. So if we wait for just research, we'll never advance because the advancement created before research, and the research are there to hypothesize why that works. And then you just kind of figure out later. And what I love about this whole discussion so far is that, we talk about basic fundamental principles of yoga and all that stuff. And you also got to look at those things based on the lens in which the creator intended upon. And, the fact that people have bad cue, like what was the situation like? Right. And plus they didn't have the knowledge that we have today. So just kind of going back to our first point was expanding on the fundamental with the research and the tool and the knowledge that we have. So that way we can make the fundamental even better, like not to tear it apart. Right. And going back to the whole posture thing, I always think it's a lazy way. It's a cop out way of not having a hard conversation. It's almost like it's a hard conversation, but I have to tell someone who has osteoarthritis that just gained 50 pounds that say, hey, that's going to contribute to their knee pain, it's easy to say that has nothing to do with their knee pain. When you know mass is mass, gravity's acting on the same joint. If you hang on the same joint, you weigh more, it's going to be hard. But it's such an uncomfortable conversation. So it's better for people to say, well, research said you can round your back as much as possible.
Yeah.
And you have no pain. But then again, ever since the pandemic, I've been reading research and I've been pretty skeptic of their methodology. I question, I was like, if they were to replicate this, because that's the whole point of research, you should be able to replicate it on the dime and still get the same outcome. And if it's so hard to replicate, then how can I trust that outcome? Right.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing, is there's always a subjectivity, like you said, based on what you might be, even if you're not trying to be biased going into it. I mean, something like posture is so multifaceted. It's not just like pain. You might not feel pain for decades, but there's lots of things before pain. Like you might be tired. You might have, weakness in your extremities if you're like this all the time and you're not getting great blood flow and great, all kinds of stuff that is not pain related. So I don't think anybody can really argue that your joint, coming from the scaffolding up, your joints love to be in a pretty centrated position where they've got optimal congruency. They've got all the soft tissue structures balanced, and then you can move. But I think I see this a lot in the yoga world and in the movement world. So we teach hip hinging. And so then people will say, well, is lumbar flexion not good? And I'm like, no, I've never said that. Right? It's that if you're flexing at your lumbar spine in lieu of moving your hips, and you do that over and over again, that's going to create an imbalance, whether it creates pain, whether it creates disc herniation. I'm not going that far ahead. I don't want to teach from a place of fear, but this is more, your hips are made for trillions of cycles of hip flexion.
Yeah.
Right. Your lumbar spine, we can look at the joints, this, big ball and socket synovial joint versus cartilaginous joints. They have different function, and the function of the vertebral joints, they're cartilaginous. Of course, the facet joints are synovial, so we have more, but the cartilaginous joints, where we are stacking that, the natural curves of the spine, they're cartilaginous, which is for energy exchange. It's not for tons of movement. So that tells you from the structure that our core is made to transmit energy. And so if we're constantly moving from it in lieu of moving from these joints that are made for movement, there is going to be an imbalance. So, but people, they get black and white. It's like, no, depends on the situation. You get on all fours, you're doing cat-cow, great. First of all, you don't have the load of your trunk as you fold forward. You don't have all these different things, and you don't have this functional movement of folding forward that we do all the time that you're creating in a suboptimal way. So it is interesting because people, like you said, it's hard to have the conversations when it's about like, we need to change some habits, because what you're assuming is the user, the consumer, the customer is too lazy to do it. And this is, I think, in the modern medical world. I had a thyroid issue years ago. It's in my family. Everybody has it. And the guy's like, well, we could blow out your thyroid, or we could put you on anti-thyroid medicine. And I was like, that sounds very dramatic. I think I did some research. I did some acupuncture and herbal remedy. And sure enough, in a year, it was gone. And I said to the guy, I was like, how about this fact that, and he goes, oh no, 2 to 4% just, we don't know why, but it just is cured. And I thought, well, he has to do that because most people aren't going to inquire and want to do something different. It's much easier to take a pill that you're prescribed that will eliminate or improve the situation versus to change something else that might be, and it was during a very stressful time in my life. So your thyroid, my thyroid was just responding. To eliminate it would have been disastrous. But we're really assuming that the consumers are not going to want to change stuff. They're going to want the easy fix. And then and maybe that's true. Maybe it would be harder to do the different approach, but it's not even in the environment. And that's, I think, one of quite a few things that are not great about our medical system.
Yeah, and just to expand on that real quick, uh, with research, they tend to go with the majority rules kind of thing, right? Rather than examining like the 2 to 4% that actually got rid of it of the disease. No, we're gonna focus on the 94. Like, why don't you expand on the 2 to 4% and see what they did? But
Yes.
also, it's so hard to quantify and it's so hard to recruit people. You recruit 100 people to participate, and you tell them like, hey, you're gonna do, and I know about thyroid, so my wife went through it. You have to do celery juice every single day. You got to do this. You got to do that. You got to meditate. You got to walk. You got to get sunlight within 20 minutes of waking. People are overwhelmed by just that. Like the fact that people can't get sunlight, and I listen to your competing podcast, which is the Uberman Lab, right? I know it's Uberman
Yeah.
Lab and it's
Yeah.
you,
Yeah.
and he always just advocate 20 minutes of sunlight upon waking. You know how hard it is for people to do that, because people don't, again, people feel guilty about even working out for themselves. And imagine just going out getting the sun. Like, that will cure a lot of things, depression and everything else. Listen, depression rate in Alaska, when it's all night all day around, is much higher.
Yes, right. I mean, yeah, because those that suprachiasmatic nuclei, they're like the pacemaker for our all of our systems. So if when we get that early light exposure, they're really setting up the systems for how we behave, how
Mm-hmm.
we feel, how we eat, how we sleep, and then that's what's hard is it's bookends later on. Like we don't look out enough. It's all like this should be preventative sounds kind of not that fun, whatever it is, but it should be like, this is the joyful prescription for life.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, in doing it, it's going to help prevent many, many things. And of course, people will need medicine. I'm not against medicine. I
Mm-hmm.
know people are going to need it for all kinds of reasons. But I want it to be a path that there other paths have been explored. It's not the immediately like, here you go. And is there anything else that you could have done in your lifestyle?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, those are things that we should be introduced to as young people, just like we should get to know the body.
Mm-hmm.
What are your scapula? Why do you want your scapula here? How do your scapula influence your shoulder and influence your core and your breathing and all of this? It doesn't have to be like you're going to PT school, but everybody has a right to know that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you could not be a better spoke model than this, because you grew up in a very medical household, and the fact that you're saying this, I think anyone who's listening could really appreciate that. And I know time is coming to an end. I have to ask one last question. What keep you going?
Really just enthusiasm for what I'm doing, enthusiasm for life. I see people who they have kind of two lives, the life that they're living to be able to do the life that they, want to spend more time in. And I feel like I have been able to, here's my little guy coming in.
Yeah.
I'm living all parts of my life in the way I want it to be. That it doesn't mean, as a business owner, there aren't parts that are not, more tedious, but I'm so in alignment. So by being in alignment, I really refuel myself. I'm very creative. So if I'm moving, it's like my art, it's like my therapy, it's everything. So I'm kind of constantly thinking of movement. And then I'll say my family, I have an amazing family. My husband, I have to credit my husband actually in so many ways for helping me be a rebel, because he was someone who his brother died when he was a teenager. And like you were saying about your dad, who I'm very sorry, my dad died 4 years ago. So I know the pain
Sorry
all
about
too
that.
well. It never goes away,
Mm-hmm.
but you're right. It gives us, so with my husband having such an early loss, I think he just knew what mattered in life.
Mm-hmm.
And so to have a partner like that is, I would not be who I am today without that. I really believe that. Like I've done a lot of the work myself, but I've had someone who showed joy and didn't fall for all the trappings that we can fall for, but really knew what mattered, which was being happy and being authentic and listening to what brings you joy. And my kids do that too. And then I have an amazing community. We have a worldwide community. We have over, I think it's now 80 countries. And it's so that to see that this is impacting people, it is so, it's like it refuels me daily. I
Mhm.
mean, it really does. So there's a lot of things, but I would say all of those things, and just yeah, being true to who I am.
I love that. So where can people find you?
So you can find my website is lytyoga.com. That's lytyoga.com. Has all the information, the online platform. There's a link to that. There's my podcast. We have blogs. Check out the Lit Daily is the name of our online platform. We have over 600 classes for all levels. There's everything there. It can be overwhelming, but we have lots of filters. If you join for a 2-week free trial, um, we take you through like how to go through it, so we can really guide you in that way. But you can also always direct message me. I'm really active in answering people on Instagram, and that's at lara.heimann.
Love it. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. I think you and I could have kept going for like 4 hours. I
I
think the
agree.
path we were going down, we didn't even get into business. We didn't even get into like PT. So I think next year I'm going to have to schedule you out, and then perhaps I'll come visit you down to your studio. I think that would be really fun.
I would love
Um,
it. I would love
yes,
it. Yeah, the yoga yurt. Here it is.
yes.
Ah,
Oh, yes. I love it.
yeah.
Lara, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy your holidays. Happy New Year to you, to your family.
Thank you so much, Natty. You as well. This was really just a treasure to be able to talk to you. And I feel like, again, yeah, we're always like brothers from another mother, sister, parents. We all kind of walk the same talk. And I love sharing this passion with people that are like you. So thank
Well,
you.
thank you so much. I appreciate it.